And welcome another superstar from the tech industry, Tiffani Bova, who is the Global Growth and Innovation and Evangelist from Salesforce. And Tiffani will be interviewed by Nicquel Ellis, and this is a keynote on building your personal brand, definitely a theme of the day and something we all want to learn about. So Tiffani and Nicquel, thank you for joining us, and I will hand it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Fairygodboss, for having us. I am Nicquel Ellis, and I am the senior writer covering race and equality at CNN. A lot of my work that I do at CNN focuses on health disparities and the intersection of race and politics, as well as the advancement of women of color. I am very passionate about giving a voice to underrepresented and underserved groups. And I am excited to be here, and I am looking forward to speaking to our keynote speaker here, Tiffani Bova. I'm going to introduce Tiffani and kind of give a little bit of information about her and her background. Tiffani is the Chief Growth Evangelist at Salesforce and the author of the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, Growth IQ: Get Smarter About the Choices That Will Make or Break Your Business. Tiffani is a top social media influencer and a welcomed guest on Bloomberg, BNN, Cheddar, MSNBC, and Yahoo Finance, among others. She also contributes her thinking to publications including the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Entrepreneur, Thrive, the Rotman School of Management, and the Duke Dialogue Review. Tiffani is a change maker whose thought-provoking and forward-thinking insights have made her a frequent guest on a variety of industry-leading podcasts and live broadcasts. So Tiffani, my first question for you is, can you tell us a bit more about your career? You've taken an unconventional approach where you often refer to your career by the decades of your life. What are the top things you've learned from each decade of your life?
Well, first, let me start by saying, Nicquel, thank you so much for such a kind introduction, and to all of you from Fairygodboss for having me, and all of you who are attending. I love this question because it kind of came to me in a conversation where people say, hey, talk to me about your career. And it's like, you could go on for minutes, if not longer. And so I came up with kind of these chunks of my 20s were very much about, I don't know what I want to do without a whole lot of direction. I'm just saying me personally in my 20s. Kind of in my late 20s, I said, I really need to start to figure out what I want to do for a career perspective. In my 30s was all about career. It was about progressing in that, moving up in the organization, of course, making more money, having greater impact and more sphere of control, if you will. Then in my 40s, I was like, wow, there has to be more than this. I was tired. I needed a break. I was burnt out from how quick I was running in my 30s. And now in my 50s, it's much more about contribution than consumption. And so that's sort of the easiest way for me to describe my career path.
Awesome. And Tiffani, you and I had a conversation earlier where you revealed to me that you were from Hawaii. And I thought that was really cool. And I was hoping that you could maybe talk a little bit about maybe how growing up in Hawaii shaped who you are today, and how your upbringing inspired you to want to go into this field.
Yeah, such a great question. I have such a love for where I was born and raised. Rarely do people say they were born and raised in Hawaii. My parents went there on their honeymoon, actually before it was a state, and never left. So I had the benefit of being born and raised there. It taught me so much about culture, because Hawaii is such a melting pot from all parts of the world. It also was fantastic. You'd sit in your science class and you'd learn about volcanoes and how the world was created, and you'd get on an airplane and fly to the Big Island and see a volcano. And then you'd learn about the power of, the ocean and the reef, and then you'd take a bus to the ocean and go look at the reef. So it was really fantastic. And I always say that I was blessed to have my childhood in Hawaii.
Yeah, that is amazing. Can you tell us a bit about your role at Salesforce and what that entails?
Yeah, Salesforce is a dream job for me. And I have to say that I feel like all the decisions I made along the way in my career led me here, led me to an opportunity when I was in the decade of leaving my 40s and into my 50s. I was saying, again, how can I have a greater impact? How can I start doing things that are much more around giving back to an industry that has been so great to me over such a long period of time? And for any of you who are Salesforce clients, you may know we do an event, usually in person in San Francisco, called Dreamforce, where we get 150, 200,000 people come in person live to come and listen to what Salesforce has to say. And I was an analyst in the 10 years prior to me joining Salesforce. And when I attended that event, that was the only technology event I can say in my career that I left wanting to be a better human and to be a better person. Not really learning about technology per se. You could do that if you wanted to, but most of the keynotes and the executive sessions were very much around purpose over profit and business being the greatest platform for change. So when I had sort of finished my 40s and was looking to my 50s to do this much more contribution kind of role, I knew that this was the place I wanted to work. And it's been such an amazing journey over the last 5 years of all the things I've been able to do like this. I mean, I wouldn't have this opportunity if it wasn't, for where I work and what I get to do.
Wow, that's amazing as well, Tiffani. Just listening to your journey, I'm just so impressed and so inspired right now. And I want to talk about some of your career achievements. And I know that one that you talk about a lot is speaking at the United Nations. Can you discuss that experience and what that was like?
Yeah, this is one of those ones where like a little girl from Hawaii who's, surfing on weekends goes, you don't dream that you're going to end up speaking at the United Nations, let alone be asked to speak at the United Nations. Like, let's just start there. And it was in my first year, actually, of being here at Salesforce. And I aligned with a group that was doing a lot for Women and Girls 2030. And I reached out and said, hey, if there's anything I can ever do to support this effort, I'm all in around the UN's SDG goals, one of which is equality and how do we, do things with technology in ways that are, advantageous for everybody. And they invited me to speak at the United Nations. And so, I invited 2 friends and I'm like, this may never happen again. And so flew myself to New York and showed up and, just walking through those halls of all the decisions that have been made, both good and bad, right, from a global perspective, and feeling the pure gratefulness of being in those 4 walls. And then speaking there was just one of those career moments that goes down in my top 5 for sure.
Wow. And also I want to talk about self-promotion as well, which you are clearly very good at. You have achieved and grown a large following on all of your platforms, I've noticed. But I know that women generally are not as good as men at self-promotion. And I wanted to ask you, why do you think that is? And what can we do to empower women to be more fearless in promoting their brands and their careers?
Yeah, I'd say this. I think that I'm good at it in some cases, and then in some cases, there's so much more I could do. But I also approach it very differently. Some people have a blend of their personal and professional brands online. Their Facebook account or their Instagram account or their Twitter account may be what they personally want to do and then what they professionally do. And early on, I made a decision to separate those 2 things. And that has allowed me to be very focused on my social media platforms that are, sort of career related, to always keep the conversation there and bring in some personal aspects, but also give me an ability to not share everything personally with the entire world. And so that was a decision that I made early that I think really helped. But there's also times on my professional where I want to say things personally, right? Like, oh, this is just ridiculous. And then I stop myself, because I always want to try to put out positive messages and, what can we do to just make it better, whatever it is we're sort of having a conversation about. And so I don't always put things up, but I've learned that if I continue to just stay very positive in what I'm communicating and what I'm sharing, and it's helpful to people, then I will always continue to do that.
Very good. And in your book, you discuss growing paths. And growing path number 10 is all about unconventional strategies or doing well by doing good. How can our audience identify companies that embody this mantra as they're looking for their next career opportunity?
What's been great about that conversation, when I was writing my book, I sort of came up with 10 paths to growing your business from a top line perspective. And the 10th path was called unconventional strategies, as Nicquel just said. And I thought it was going to be something like the freemium model. And for those of you who know what that is, it just means I'll give it to you for 90 days. And at the end of 90 days, you need to pay me for it, right? But it's a way to get new customers in, whether it's doing yoga or a gym, or it's technology, or, a coffee or a restaurant, like giving something away to get people to come in and try it and then maybe continue to use it. And so I was trying to figure out what's that next freemium model for business. And if you remember the story I just told about, trying to find a place where it was about how do I work someplace that has an impact on doing well by doing good and purpose over profit, and really a lot that's happening now in the Business Roundtable about many CEOs getting together and saying, we really need to rethink this capitalism model. And so I said, this is a perfect opportunity for me to make number 10 of how do we position organizations in a way that it isn't just about profit. It's about making sure their employees are good, the communities they serve, that they can do no harm, and the ways in which we can use technology for betterment and democratize the ability to get access to that. So I think if you're listening to this and you think that your company is not potentially sharing around equality or around some of the big social issues today, what is that? What is that voice? What is that message? And how can you weave it into the culture, into the conversation that you're having? If not externally, most definitely internally. And so it was a great learning experience for me to do the research and find out how many companies have really pivoted this way. And I think with the pandemic, we've even seen more of that, right? How do we make sure our communities and our schools and our teachers and our frontline workers are getting all the things that they need? That is a great example of purpose over profit.
Right. And also, you've also mentioned and discussed before how you don't believe that your gender or being a woman has prevented you from ever getting a job. In an era like right now, where for a lot of women, they feel like the odds in their industry are stacked against them, especially women of color who are underrepresented in so many industries. What have you found to be the most successful for you in entering these male-dominated industries?
Yeah, I would say selling technology 25 years ago was pretty much male dominated. And the customers who were buying it were also male. So I definitely stood out. And, I might be completely naive in thinking that I got a job because I was a woman, or I didn't get a job because I was a woman, that sort of feeling. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe it happened. Maybe I got it because I was a woman, or I didn't get it because I was a woman. But either way, I really early on took control of my career in a way that in my 30s, I actually changed jobs every 18 months. It wasn't because I felt like I wasn't getting an opportunity because I was a woman. It was because I felt like I wasn't getting an opportunity. And so I ended up leaving to create that opportunity for myself. And with each of those changes, it was interesting. My network at the time was like, look, you're sort of a higher risk. People might not hire you because you only stay 18 months. And so they're going to invest in you and then you leave. And I said, look, I'd love to stay. But I went to them and said, I wanted more responsibility. I want more challenge. I want to stay here. I like working here. And most of them would come back and go, let us think about it. We'll get back to you in 30 days. 90 days would go by. I'd never hear from them again. So I would go back in and say, hey, did you make a decision? And if they said, we enjoy you working here, we respect your work, but we don't have anything right now. But if you just hang on a little while longer, we might have something next year. And I literally would be like, I gotta go. I gave you the opportunity and I have to take, ownership of my career. And so that's what I did. And so I guess my piece of advice would be, if you feel you're not getting the opportunity, whether it's because you're a woman, you're a person of color, you have a disability, whatever you think may be the bias of why you're not getting something, then you've got to figure out, what do I need to do to create another opportunity for myself? Reach out to your network, see if anybody's hiring, see what you could do or what skills you might need to re-skill yourself for another career. But ultimately, it is, we have to take some responsibility for our ability to move forward. Now, I'm not saying that always works, and I'm not saying that sometimes the bias will keep you from making those changes, but you have to find a place where people will appreciate you for who you are and value what you bring to the table from an employment and career perspective.
What about the women who feel like they have invested so much time and energy into a company, and they're kind of feeling as though they're mid-career and starting over just seems like such a, like it will be like a challenge to start over at this point in their careers. I mean, what would you tell those women?
I can only speak for myself, is that, I feel a sense of loyalty to people that I work with, and I care about them. I'm emotionally invested. Women are that way, and we're built that way. And so it's like almost, how do you break up with somebody, right? When you want to change jobs, sometimes it can be very emotionally challenging. But I would say that, and also during this time, women more than any other segment has been really impacted on, a lot of the progress we've made over the last decade. A lot of it was wiped out when women had to go back to home to take care of their kids and families and all of those things. And will they go back to the workforce? And I'm just going to give you a little example. LinkedIn did something just last week, where now if people take a gap in their career to, have a child or take care of an elder parent, or they're sick themselves, that in LinkedIn, you didn't have an option to say, I took a gap from work and this is what I was doing. Maybe you were volunteering, or maybe you were taking care of somebody. And so you can actually list that so it doesn't look like your resume has a gap in it. That only changed last week. So, for all these women that would take time off for maternity leave, and even dads for paternity leave, and they might be a stay-at-home dad and taking 2 years off. Everybody wants to have an ability to, do what's right for them and their family, and also have a career. And so I think that it's a matter of really understanding where and how you need to make investments in yourself from a career perspective. If you don't invest in yourself, nobody else will. You've got to figure out, change is hard, absolutely, but there's no possibility to grow in comfort. We have to become uncomfortable to grow, and we have to fall in love with failure, because it might not work, but we've got to be able to dust ourselves off and stand back up and keep going. And that tends to be something that men think they're better at than us, I think, but I think we really have the strength to do it if you just give yourself permission to be a little uncomfortable.
And I think for some women, they also feel like they want to work somewhere where they're going to be supported. I think, you may feel as though if your company is ran by, all men or all white men, that, you won't get that same support if you were to, have to leave and have a baby and be gone for a while. You might feel like you might get overlooked for a promotion or a new position that you really wanted. And I think women feel like that makes it harder for us. And so can you talk about what Salesforce is doing to support women and make it a place that, women can enjoy working, where they actually do feel supported?
Yeah, I'm going to focus on equal pay for just a moment, because I think that that's a great place to start. Yeah, absolutely. And so Salesforce has done it, I think it's 4 or 5 years now, where 2 female executives went to Mark Benioff, our CEO, and actually said, I think there's pay disparity between men and women. Mm-hmm. And, if anybody knows anything about us, our CEO is absolutely like, there's no possible way that is true, right? We are very much about equality. It's one of our core tenets, like, can't be happening. Sure enough, they did an audit in the US and found that there was a disparity between the two. And this was just on gender. We just started at gender on year 1. And it was about $3.5 million in a gap. So like role, like tenure, like status, men, women is the payoff. And I don't know what the timing was, but I'm going to do this for dramatic effect. Let's say that this was, on a Monday and Friday was payday. We shorted up on 1 paycheck. Mm-hmm. leveled the playing field. And then we did it every year and have done it. And now we're over $14 million on actually shoring that up. And we've expanded it beyond men and women. Sometimes it's because of acquisitions. Sometimes it's because of hiring practices. And so now we've put a lot of things in place to make sure that it isn't just, men and women, it's people of color. It's, we would check to see if it's, first or second language. Is there disability bias? Is there something in there that is saying you're doing the same job and you're at a disadvantage from a pay perspective? And so I would recommend, doing that audit and finding out if you have this unconscious bias in your hiring practices and how you can really eliminate those. And so we've put things in place that require hiring managers do certain things to make sure that doesn't accidentally happen. And so I can say if you have commitment from the top and it works its way through the entire organization, great things can happen.
And while we're on the topic of pay equity, what advice would you give women who want to ask for a raise, but they don't necessarily feel comfortable or empowered to go to their manager and do that?
I feel you. I don't like talking about money with anybody, let alone my boss, right? So, and I just think that's sort of common, men or women. I think that here's what I would say. I have done this in my career where during my review, if it was semi-annually or annually, sometimes quarterly, I would ask for a career plan. Like, this is what I'd like. This is what I'm looking for. Not only from a responsibility standpoint, but also from a pay standpoint. I'd love to map out a career plan for me over the next 12, 24 months on how I can get from where I am to where I'd like to go. And it might be, I want more responsibility, and with more responsibility should come more pay. Now, if you're lucky and you do that audit and you've shored up from a pay perspective anyway, that will help you. But ultimately, it would be, if you have that conversation with your boss, I would say before you do that, meet with your champion or your mentor or your trusted network and ask them how to sort of pose that conversation. But if you just walk in and go, hey, I want a raise, it's not probably the best approach, right? But if you walk in and say, I'd like to talk about my career, then it sort of takes them on let me guide you. Let me help you. Let me be your champion or your mentor. And how can I get you from where you are to where you want to be? People do not leave companies, they leave managers. So if your manager, if your leader is not willing to have those conversations with you, maybe you go to HR and say, I'm looking for this career guidance. And if you're not getting in both places, once again, you have to create that opportunity for yourself. I'm just going to back up for a moment and say, at each of those 18-month transitions in my 30s, I doubled my salary, my take-home salary. I was in sales, so it's sort of a different game, right? We can make money on commission checks. But every 18 months, I doubled my salary, my total income. And so would I have done that had I stayed in that original job? I don't think so. I would say that, and because in sales, performance is so easy to track, you hit your number, you don't hit your number. But I just give that to you as an example of have the conversation from a career perspective, check in with your champions and mentors on how best to approach that.
Really good advice, Tiffani. I think what I often hear from my mentors is that the fastest way to get a raise is to get a new job. That's the fastest way to get a sizable raise too. So that's really interesting. But I also wanted to ask you too about diversity and inclusion. I know that you have invited some diversity and inclusion professionals onto your podcast. And we know that a lot of companies have struggled with inclusion, and we've just seen that just in the last year. What are some of your biggest lessons that you've learned about promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at companies? And what can our audience learn as far as what they can do at their own organizations to promote diversity?
Yeah, I'd say this. I'm so excited about the fact that the generation, kind of Nicquel, your generation and even younger, that this is really important to you. I can tell you that through my sort of 20s and 30s and kind of part of my 40s, I was not having these conversations in the four walls of my work with my managers. I wasn't hearing us talking about it. We would kind of brush over it, whatever. And now it's in the dialogue. It's in the conversation. And as Nicquel mentioned, I have a podcast called What's Next with Tiffani Bova, and it was my way of actually learning in these conversations with these really interesting people. And I started on this journey with even something as basic as diversity of thought. Diversity of thought. You think really fast and answer where someone else might need to think about it, contemplate it, and then give an answer maybe tomorrow. Those are very different approaches. And then when I started understanding more about diversity beyond thought, right? It can be by gender, by color, by language, by region, by all kinds of things. I realized that just being diverse and then not giving them a voice and not letting them be heard doesn't solve the problem, right? It has to be all of those things, getting them a seat at the table, whatever that diversity may mean to your company, giving them an opportunity to speak, and giving them an opportunity to be heard, and then action those things. Once again, I'll use us as an example. You know, our CEO often says that a lot of the ideas around diversity and inclusion, like the equal pay I just gave, came from 2 employees, right? So from the bottom up, what's important to us? Is it we want to do something for the LGBTQ community? Is it we want to do something for Black Lives Matter? Is it we want to do something for the Asian community? Like, what is it we want to do comes from the employees. And we are set up in a way that is the best way to know what we should be focused on with 57,000 employees around the globe. And so I would say that I feel like I learn every single day on this conversation. I don't know the answer, but I'm always asking better and more informed questions so that I can learn more, so how I can play a role in the solution instead of just talking about the problem. And so, you know, that's what I feel my journey has been. And I think that it goes down to giving opportunity, providing a safe place for people to use their voice, and then actually hearing what they have to say, whether you like it or not,
Very good, Tiffani. Do we have any audience questions? I am not seeing any in the chat, but I just wanted to let folks know that if you have a question, you can pop it in the chat. Oh, here's one. From Maureen Drinkwater. She asks, Tiffani, is job hopping no longer stigmatized, or is it industry specific?
Great question. Don't know the answer, but personally, I don't care. Like, at the end of the day, are we worried about, you know, like all those people that told me job hopping was a bad thing? You know, 10 years later, I'm like, it didn't work out too badly for me. Now, was every decision I made right? Absolutely not. Did everything work out the way I hoped it would? Absolutely not. But I knew that if I had to go again, I could go again and find something that was going to be better for me. So I also think that, especially now with millennials and the younger generation, they're changing jobs much more frequently if you look at the research. And so, you know, I think that stigma is now almost the norm. But whether there was one or wasn't one, I think I go back to what I said earlier, right? Just taking ownership of making sure you're doing what's best for you and your family and your situation. And then take advice, you know, if people think that it might be, you know, a career hindrance for you as you try to move to other organizations. But ultimately, you have to do what feels right for you.
Good. I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat, so I have a question. So
Sure.
many of us have been stuck working from home for the last year due to the pandemic, and I think for a lot of us, maintaining work-life balance when you work from home, when you work from your kitchen or your home office, can be difficult. You know, knowing when it's time to log off, knowing when you should take a lunch break, as you would normally take in an office, can be hard. So just wanted to ask you, Tiffani, how do you practice self-care and set boundaries?
I'm gonna answer this on 2 sides. One is the life, you know, the day in the life of Tiffani Bova in 2019 was 375 flying miles, 100 keynotes on 6 continents. So 375 flying miles in a year is, I had no balance. Like, you know, it was way off for me. 2020, I landed from Sydney on March 10th and didn't get back on an airplane and was quote unquote working from home. And I will tell you, burnout is at an all-time high, regardless of whether you're looking at men or women. People are feeling equal pressure. And I would say that, if you're listening to this and you're a leader and you're a manager, it's your responsibility to say everybody needs to put an hour in every day for lunch, or a half hour in the morning and a half hour for the afternoon, and go for a walk around the block, or listen to, a mindful podcast or whatever it might be, right? To try to put some structure in the downtime, the reflection time, the recharge time. But I will tell you that if you also are a leader and you're sending off emails at 10, and I heard it on an earlier session, right? 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, then it's telling your people that they need to be responding to you in real time. So maybe schedule those to not go off until the morning, or say at the top of it, I don't need you to reply until tomorrow morning. Whatever it might be, you have to set the tone. Otherwise, people will think that they need to be responsive 24/7. Now, the other trick is you have to also take ownership of your calendar. Put those half hour blocks in, put that hour block in, tell people I'm booked at that time, and give yourself that space. I've been really good at, although, I have like 6 in the morning to take care of Europe, and I have like 8 or 9 o'clock at night to take care of Asia Pacific time zones. But for the mean, I've really gotten much better. It took me a year of stopping at a reasonable time and not walking back into my, my home office on the weekends. But it took me a long time to change my habit of working 24/7, always being on the road, being burnt out on weekends. And so I feel like this time has given me an opportunity to really understand what balance means. So, I can only say for myself, that's what's worked for me.
Wow, very good, Tiffani. All good advice for our audience here. Do we have time for one more question?
We have to go on. Tiffani, this has been amazing. Nicquel, thank you both so much. What an amazing session. Thank you.